I talk real loud, so if you can't hear me, you raise your hand, I'll talk louder. I'm glad you're here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. I have a couple of people I want to introduce to you. I don't know if Decatur's farther than, where was that last place that your relatives came from? But I do have my cousin and her husband from Decatur, Jean and Mary Jo Chamness. Stand up. They came all the way down here just to hear this. And I have my wife sitting over here. She comes sometimes, but you know. And sitting by Judy is Kent Biffle, who is a writer of Texana columns for the Dallas Morning News. Kent, stand up. Thanks for coming. Well, I'm glad you're all here. I have given talks before where you had to disguise the subject matter a little bit. I did that when we did the meeting on the Ku Klux Klan. And if you noticed in the paper or in your newsletter, there wasn't an awful lot of names in there. And the reason for that was that there were some names that probably you would recognize. But tonight we're going to use those because we're talking about something that happened, an actual event. And I like to research obscure things, as you probably already know. I'm going to read some to you tonight. I'm going to just tell it off the top of my head tonight. I want to start by, this was a week ago in the Tyler newspaper on the front page. A week ago. Fill her up. Drivers in Tyler across the state are enjoying the cheapest gasoline prices in the decade. Isn't that nice? Well, in the 1930s, they had much cheaper prices than that, but they also had a barrel of trouble with it, too. And we're going to be talking about that tonight. East Erwin Street is kind of my focus point for this because, you know, Tyler doesn't have a main street, to my knowledge. But it used to. Ferguson Street was named Main Street. And then Mr. Ferguson built his hotel or something, and they decided they'd honor him, and they changed the present-day Ferguson Street from Main Street to Ferguson Street. But the main street of Tyler has always been Erwin Street. West Erwin, coming in from Canton and Dallas and Athens and so forth, you know where the split is out there. And then on the other side, coming in from Kilgore and Henderson, the oil fields of East Texas. And this was supposedly the longest street, and supposedly the street name actually went from county line to county line. At least it went completely through Tyler. It was the only street that you could go completely across Tyler at that time. So Erwin Street was a very important street, and there's still a lot of old buildings on both ends of that street that are still there. That we'll be talking about some of them. I'm not going to talk about West Erwin very much, but I'm going to talk about East Erwin. It was named for Thomas B. Erwin, whose house was out on West Erwin, about where Palace was out there. And at one time, I understand it, in fairly recent days, there was a move to change the name of Erwin Street to Main Street. And the descendants of the Erwins came out of the woodwork. And that stopped that. So it's still exactly what it was named. The streetcar line ran out East Erwin Street as far as Horace, which is out there at Don Juan's Mexican food restaurant now. It turned south and went on to down to Clayton and down Baxter to the Hill Natatorium, which was a nice swimming pool there in the early part of this century, which, Tyler had a really nice swimming pool in those days over on the east side. The oil boom came along in 1931, and that highway really caught the traffic coming in from Gladenwater area, from Kilgore area, from Henderson, Ark. All those communities were always produced of it. And there wasn't many paved roads. There were a lot of dirt roads, but that highway from Tyler to Henderson, for instance, was paved rather early. Now, the minute you turned off to go to Overton, you were up to mud in your axles and every other road. We're going to be talking about Erwin Street. Guy Lewis, found the Discovery Well down close to Wright City. Little refineries popped up all over East Texas when they discovered this great Texas field. There were like 75 or 80 small refineries around Gladewater and Kilgore, and of course, some Park and so forth. And with the refineries and with the abundance of oil that they found, service stations started popping up. Only they weren't called service stations at first. They were called fill-in stations, because that's what you did. You filled up your car, or at least you bought a couple of gallons or so out of a pump that the handle worked back and forth, and you saw the actual gasoline coming into the glass thing, and then it came into your car, so you knew you were getting exactly what you were paying. Downstairs is a glass pump, an old-fashioned pump that is on loan from the family of Felix Stringer, who had a service station out on East Erwin Street. And so I probably won't be able to see it tonight, but the next time you come, take a look at that. Now, in 1927 and 28, there were 33 filling stations in the city limits of Tyler. Now, obviously, the city limits didn't go terribly far, but at least the ones in the city we know about and where they were. 6 of those were on East Erwin. Now, in 1930, there were 41. In 1932, there were 77 in Tyler. In 1933, there were 83 service stations in Tyler. 1934-35, there were 89 service stations in Tyler. And by 1936 and 37, there were 91 stations in Tyler, and 17 of them were on East Erwin Street. There were some major players in this. Humble had 4 stations, and Gulf had 3. And the Dixie stations had 4, and Continental had 2. And there were a lot of little independents with two tanks out in front with a little building, usually no canopy at all to protect the guy that was working for the station. But it was a place to get gas, and they did very well. Sold lots of gas. One of the stations that I want to talk to you about is a little building out on East Erwin Street. I'll just hold this up so when you come and look at these. This was a Dixie station, and it was a kit station. And they were made out of metal, and they were bolted together. It came in a kit. And they were all painted yellow on the outside. They all had what looked like a tile roof, but it was actually galvanized tin painted red. And the inside of the building was painted bright red. And they were very small, about 15 feet by maybe 18 feet, something like that. There is one of these still in Tyler on East Erwin Street by Southwest Dairies. It is completely, almost rusted down. There's a great big chinaberry tree right over it. That's the only chinaberry tree on East Erwin Street that I know about. But anyway, if you go out that way, just before you get to the dairy, there is a Dixie station. Now, there were some Dixie signs still up in recent years, but collectors have managed to put those someplace else. The Dixie stations, at one time, there were 3 of these, one on West Erwin Street, one on East Erwin Street, one on North Dixie Highway, and then the main Dixie station was at the foot of the overpass bridge. And Mr. T.O. Howard had, at one time, all of those stations. Felix Stringer, to whom I've dedicated, whose memory I've dedicated this program, was a long-time service station operator out on East Erwin Street. And Mrs. Stringer is here with us tonight, and we just wave your hand or stand up. Well, I'm so tickled to death that she's here tonight. Thank you for coming. I used to go by and stop with Felix. He had a museum that he ran at a service station. And he was always asking me, James, somebody needs to be working on a story of the filling stations, because I knew where they all were, he said, and I can help you with it. And I was interested in something else at the time, and I'd put him off and put it off until it was too late, like we do sometimes. So I'm dedicating to the memory of Felix Stringer, who was so much interested in history, the history of East Erwin Street. He loved that street. And he opened the station out there in December of 1936. It was at 1417 East Erwin, and then he was there until April of 50, and he moved just about 2 lots back toward town at 1405 East Erwin, and he sold gas there until June of 1990, which was a long time. And but his station was just one of many. You almost every block you had 1 or 2 stations. Now down the hill from Felix's station, more down toward where the fork of the Kilgore-Henderson Highway is now, there was a station down there called the Blue Eagle Oil Company. And that was owned by Clint and Ira Ferguson. And they had come up here from Goose Creek right at the beginning of the boom and had a distribution company as well as having a couple of at least service stations. Well, the East Texas Field produced a price war that was very vicious. It affected, I guess, all over Texas, but it really hit here because anybody with a truck to haul gas could go over to those refineries and buy it very cheap. It got so desperate at one time, a person said you could swap a pint of whiskey for a whole tank truck of gasoline. It was ridiculous how low the prices got. And Mr. Hardy, who had a station on what is the old Henderson Highway, was selling gas for a nickel a gallon. And nobody could figure out how. He's paying a lot more than that a gallon. But everybody was paying almost what they were selling it for, or maybe a little bit more. And to do that, they had to make it up on oil, which they sold, and on service for the car, repairs and so forth. And they didn't make it off of gasoline. They had to sell gasoline. And so people took advantage of it. I did try to find in the Tyler paper where they advertised gas prices, and service stations just didn't advertise. Obviously, if you're losing money on the gas, you wouldn't pay big newspaper prices to sell the stuff. But this is just a few of the headlines in 1934 about the gasoline price war. Dallas Independence raised the gasoline price to 15 cents a gallon. June the 1st, gasoline 10 cents as war is on. Most majors held to 15 cents. July the 8th, most majors dropped their third grade gas from 13 to 12 cents. Only Humble and Continental held to 13. July the 23rd, gasoline price cut to 10 cents in Fort Worth. August the 31st, predict the prices to drop to 5 cents. All refineries in Gladewater and Kilgore dropped their prices to 8 cents in order to meet the price set by Gilliland Refinery of Gladewater. October the 5th, refineries agree on a 7.5 cent price per gallon for East Texas gas. November the 13th, 1934. Prices here range from 10 to 16 cents, lower than elsewhere. I interviewed Tobe McMichael, who's in his 80s, used to work at several service stations over there on East Erwin, and I was asking him about the different grades involved, and he said, well, the white gas is the cheapest, and then there was the red gas, which was the regular gas, and then there was ethyl or the premium gas. And so almost any good station would have at least 3 pumps, but a lot of them just had 2. They also had a container that you could pump out kerosene, which people still use for lights, other than starting fires and so forth. So there was a market for all of that. Well, the battlefield now was set as the majors and the independents fought for business, even at 10 cents a gallon. And we'll come back to that in just a minute, because I want to talk to you now about East Erwin Street for just a minute. Over on this wall is a Sanborn map, copies of many pages of a Sanborn map taped together of East Erwin Street, that long yellow street, and the fork over on the edge is where the Henderson and Kilgore highways split. And I copied those out of a Sanborn insurance map, which shows all of the little buildings and the width of the streets and the house numbers and the building numbers and so forth. And I had just indicated on there in 1 year the service stations that were on East Erwin. I've also indicated on there where the two stations we're going to be talking about in a minute were. They're over on the extreme right-hand side of it. We have in our archives many of the Sanborn maps, both bound. They're great things to look at because when a company bought the use of this map, a great big bound volume, it was a wonderful paper, and most of the time it was hand-drawn and hand-colored. And then the artist came around on a regular basis and would update it by pasting over buildings that had burned or drawing in new buildings that had been built. And there was a lot of information on there, whether it was two-story or one-story, and whether the tanks show, for instance, where they stored the gasoline, for instance, where they had a concrete floor, where the water line mains were, and so forth. So the Sanborn map, and it's great for doing research if you're looking for where something happened and the relationship to other things. So there are stores on there, and there are shopping centers, and there's the Hillside Park, for instance. I've colored in with green over there, Hillside Park, which is at the corner of Erwin and Flashel. That was a public park. And next to it was the first fire substation, which was substation number 1. I believe that's right, Andy David, number 1. And that building is still there, but it's used now for a Hispanic Service Center. But now that building, that was built in 1930, that particular. Hillside Park was made into a park in 1934, and there was a bandstand there. And it was named for Mr. Hill, Samar Hill, who had the lumber yard and a lot of other stuff, because he donated the bandstand. He built the bandstand. It's long gone, of course. But anyway, this was a wonderful park for that part of town. Now, they had creeks going through there, as they still do. And they had floods sometimes. You remember when the Hillside Shopping Center completely flooded one time? It's the same creek. You know, it comes right down here below us and goes on over there. Okay. Now, if you've been driving down East Erwin lately, you know that a building was torn down fairly recently, a 2-story brick building. It was an old hotel called the Mid-City Hotel. Inside that corner was the Midget Cafe. That hotel was built in 1932, and it was called the Emmett Hotel at first, and so it changed hands. But it got rather shabby toward the end and fell in, and when they tore it down and leveled the ground, there was that creek running right under it. And the boards in the back had fallen down into the creek. Now, there's still 2 buildings down there that are still all original buildings. One of them looks like there's something in it, but the man who owns that has painted a fake sign on the front to keep, apparently, maybe the city from going in there and condemning it. But anyway, the first building, as you look at it, which would be toward the west, is one of the old original buildings. And then the next building, at one time, was the Berry Meat Market, Ed Berry Meat Market. And Ed's son, who's here, loaned me a wonderful picture of this is on Erwin Street. This was in 42. Shows all the old trucks and so forth. And this building is still there. The building was the original home of Ideal Baking Company. And probably when Mr. Berry had his meat market in there, those big ovens and things that show on the Sanborn map were still there. So that's what that is. Before I get too far away from the Dixie service station, can you see the price of the gasoline? These pictures came from the Faulkner collection. And R.L. Faulkner didn't shoot these. R.L. Faulkner copied somebody's pictures of this service station. There are 5 pictures. And this, I believe, is Mr. Henley, who had this station. This was the West Erwin station. And this little building is long gone. It was at the end of its life, it was hauled out to State Park Highway and the Loop and rusted down out there along with a bunch of old wooden buildings that were moved in there, if you remember that. Anyway, these are wonderful pictures, and this is exactly what the East Erwin rusty building looked like when it was new. You can imagine that. It's bright yellow and they wore uniforms, and they had, I don't think they had ties on, but yeah, they did in one of these pictures. Anyway, that's the Dixie service station, if you want to look at that. Kids Dairy was out there too. It's now Southwest Dairy, but it was Kids Dairy at one time. And the kids owned this huge amount of property out there. At one time, at I believe it was Clayton and Erwin, there was a kid brother on every corner. You know, Will and Odie and Tom and what's that, Hubert? Right there, you know, Kids Dairy. This is a Kids Dairy 1936 photograph. And most of these people have been identified by Lee and Hubert Kidd, who loaned me this picture. You may have some relatives in here. I've got a list taken December the 3rd, 1936. Can you imagine that? Anyway, Southwest Dairies is there now. Mr. Barry, after he moved from Erwin Street, moved out there and had part of that space for his meat business. Used the storage and the cold, you know, things there. And then eventually Barry Meat Company went on out to the forts, just past the forts, and was out there for a good long while. Matter of fact, he had worked in high school. What, is he beating the ice down with a baseball bat?
Well, on the refrigeration we had the milk cans.
Okay.
And we put ice and salt in the milk cans and packed it down with a baseball bat that I brought from home. Put that in the back of the truck, and that's the only refrigeration we had.
And they were happy to see the ice coming around too, I think. There's another old building on East Erwin Street that's still there. It's a 4-unit brick building. It's the Kidd building. It's now, I don't know what's in it now. I mean, I know, but when it was built in 1933 by Levi Kidd, it was just two sections. There was a grocery on one corner, and there was a fruit stand in the second part of it. And there was a fire in 1935 in the industrial cash grocery that was there. They were always having fires in places like this. And then in 1934, the East Erwin Drug, which was there, burned. And apparently in patching it, they decided to build 2 more offices. So now there are 4 stores, and one of them, the east side, has an upstairs with apartments in it. And then eventually that burned, and they took off the apartments. And now it's just like it is today. If you look at that, though, you can see the 2 different stores. They're not quite the same. The brickwork is a little different. The slabs are different, and so forth. This is kind of the way I do research, is I made me a little sketch of the buildings with the information about it, and that's the Kidd building, if you're interested. It's the 1400 block of East Erwin. Now, another building that you might recognize as being a funny shape, and I don't even have a picture of it, is the McIntyre Plumbing Company now, but it was an old lumber yard called Lingo Leaper Lumber Company. And it was built in 1931, and later on, Hightower Reed Lumber Company was in it. And it's 2 buildings, and they've got funny peaked roofs, extreme pitch roofs that are right there side by side. That was a big lumber company. As a matter of fact, they had lumber yards in, I think, Lakewater and other places around. Lingo Leaper. Well, the Samar Hill Shopping Center and the lumber yard has been a fixture down there on Erwin Street, about where Fleischl hits, for a long time. You know, where the shopping center is now a soccer field with nothing on it. I mean, nothing building-wise. And then Samar Hill has changed a little bit, because across the fronts of those, right on the street, there were cafes and there were all kind of businesses, little stores and so forth. Up the hill, where a Mexican restaurant is now, and had its brick painted over with brick colors and white mortar, is Don Juan Mexican food restaurant. That was the old Collins drugstore. Brian Collins, yeah. some people that grew up around there probably worked in that store. But that's a really old building. I don't know the age of that. 30s, Brian? In the 30s was that built? The grocery store?
The grocery store built in 1928, cost $2,000 to build.
28. Right beside there was Horace Street, where the streetcar turned. right there. I had somebody bring me at the last meeting a couple of wonderful pictures, at least one of which I can find. Hoyt Berryman is not here tonight. They're in the Middle East somewhere coming home. This is just a snapshot of some of their family. Matter of fact, Hoyt, who's one of our members, is in here. And back behind there, you can see the Kelpin Ice Cream Company building, which is a two-story brick, and it's still there. It was a tortilla factory. It was its last business, if you remember Ortega's tortilla factory. Anyway, in the background, you know, sometimes this will be, unbeknownst, there it is. There's another picture with this that shows, they shot it from a different angle, and one of the kid houses is in the background. That's, if you've got any pictures like that with old buildings in the background, you save them because they're very interesting. Well, as it has been purported, there were some honky-tonks on these servers. This map in pink are some of those, what you would call clubs, or to the best of my knowledge, that's where they were. Because there's some of them outside the city limits, then you have to depend on people who remember going there. This is the Castle Tavern with K. And later on, it became a restaurant after beer was voted out at the end of the 1930s. Later on, I think Leo's Drive-In was there, if you remember that. It was restaurant, always in there. You know, they had a kitchen and they had stools and stuff. So it was always changing hands, but it was always there. Then, coming on out the Kilgore Highway, there was one where El Charro's is now up on top of the hill. So honky tonk that. That's the Green Dragon?
That's the old Green Dragon where the trucking company is.
Okay, but I'm talking about the one where El Charro's is now. There was one there. Green Dragon's right there. Yep. Yep. Weldon's exactly right. The Green Dragon was right there. Shady Grove was in here somewhere. I'm not quite sure about that. Silver Slipper, the Dewdrop Inn, the Blue Heaven, the Elm Grove, and out on the Kilgore Highway, I know about some of these because this is the deluxe. Well, have you ever been to the Ambassador, which is right there? This is the Ambassador, which was built over on the Henderson Highway, completely torn down, carried over to the Kilgore Highway, rebuilt. After the war, completely torn down, carried to Athens over that way, and rebuilt again. And standing in the door is Pearl Butler, who worked at a lot of these places, and one of her relatives saved these old pictures. Maybe the only picture of the Ambassador Club known to exist, but this was one of the honky-tonks, and they were mostly dance halls, you know, with canned music, and I'll grant you that some of them might have had women living there. Fights in the parking lot. What? Okay, well, who knows what they did at night, right? Anyway, we had a lot of those in the county on the major highways. There were some, of course, on the Dallas Highway and on the river a lot, you know. Greens at the river close to Chandler was pretty notorious. Anyway, this gives you an idea that East Erwin Street was an important place. It was a good neighborhood. You know, there were St. Paul's Church was out there. There were other churches. Bonner School was the main elementary school. A lot of people might have walked there to school, walked home. It was a safe neighborhood. It was a very respectable, I would say blue-collar neighborhood maybe, but, you know, working class. But a lot of people, for instance, depended on that streetcar to get back and forth to their homes. And when it folded up in the teens, there's a story about somebody who was stuck uptown, and, you know, and he didn't have, I guess he had to walk home, which would only been maybe a couple of miles or a mile and a half or something. Okay, so April 1935, we've had price wars with gasoline. We've had stations on almost every corner. Pretty common to carry a pistol in your pocket. pretty common to settle things and not take it to court, all that kind of stuff. And so this is where we get to really the heart of this story, is about a couple of men who had service stations. One service station was farther out the old Henderson Highway. It was the Henderson Highway. It's before the new Henderson Highway was built. And so if you were at Whitaker's grocery store now, you go on past there, and as the road turns, Jim Bryant's home and service station were located here. Across the street was the Cowboy filling station that I believe Jim owned at one time and owned that property, but maybe went across the street and built another house and so forth. He had lived down close to Ullman on a 100-acre farm, tried to farm. He wasn't too successful with that. Had a fairly large family. Came from a very prominent Van Zandt County family. Jim's dad was a doctor, the county health agent. He was a doctor in Mount Sylvan for a while, and I think Ullman and some other places, 2 or 3 places. Then he became the county health officer for Smith County. And Jim had a brother who was a doctor, Dr. Bryant, who built Bryant Clinic out here on South Broadway, who built Bryant Petroleum Building later on after he got kind of wealthy in the oil business. Bryant Clinic was the forerunner of what's today Trinity Medical Center. Same one. Jim had a brother who was a pharmacist named Pink Bryant. He came from a very educated family, if you can imagine. He owned some land on the Henderson Highway here, not many acres, but he must have been pretty good with service station work. He made some money on it. He signed a contract one time with Texaco, for instance, somewhere in this location here. Jim was 48 years old. His name was James Abner Bryant. He has a wife named Lula. His wife Lula lived to be 101. And Jim's big problem was that people, especially 2 brothers named Ira and Clint Ferguson, were harassing him. And Ira and Clint had this station along with their father, H.M. Ferguson, and they had the Blue Moon Oil Company. And this was a Cowboy station, and maybe, in fact, their station up here might have been called Cowboys too. I'm not sure about that. I'm not for sure this was called Cowboys. But this was, the Fergusons had this station, and Jim had this station right here. Well, the first thing they did was in November 1933, they threw dynamite on his house, knocked out all the windows. And Jim filed charges against Clint Ferguson. And I don't think anything ever happened to it. But anyway, that was the kind of the beginning. They accused each other of cutting prices, not lowering the prices when they should have, and so forth. There was a second attempt, date unknown, but there were 2 attempts, including this one that was recorded, in which he filed charges against one of the Fergusons. They broke out the globes on his oil pumps, on his gasoline pumps, the big lighted things up above. They'd go by and throw a rock through them, just anything to harass him. The price war is going on in 34. And in April of 1935, Jim moved his station, just maybe he picked up and left, he just may have just closed it up, and went up on East Erwin Street in the 1600 block and had a very small station there. And 2 days after he was there, they poured gasoline under his door and set it on fire. And he must have been sleeping in there at the time to watch out for it, because they put the fire out pretty fast. It was only $25 damage. And just right down the way was this fire substation, so they could get there pretty fast. It might have been even a metal building, like the Dixie. And so there wasn't an awful lot of stuff in the way of furniture and stuff like that. I don't know. There was only $25 damage. 2 days later, Jim was sitting on the front porch of his house, and he could hear the talking across the street and the bragging by the two Ferguson boys about what they were going to do to him. And this is from the Tyler newspaper, April 30th, 1935. I just want to read this. Last week, Bryant moved his station to a point on East Erwin Street. Friday night, his downtown station caught fire. This was Jim Bryant, number 2. The account from officers stated that Bryant and his wife were sitting on their front porch last night when a conversation began across the highway among the Fergusons. Well, I see Bryant moved his filling station, one is reported to have said. I did a good job of moving, didn't I? Bryant was reported to have called across to them. Yes, you did a good job, was the reply. And Bryant told officers that he told his wife he might as well settle this matter right now. He went inside, got his shotgun, and started firing from the porch. Apparently, the buckshot went wild when they reached the cowboy station across the highway. Officers could not say how many shots were fired. Bryant then placed his gun inside his house, and an employee drove him to the county jail where he surrendered to Deputy Ross Parker. Two Burks Walker ambulances brought the wounded people to a local hospital. Hundreds of people crowded the Henderson Highway following the ambulances and literally filling the corridors of the hospital. Doctors were summoned for emergency operations. He killed Ira Ferguson. He killed Clint Ferguson. He wounded their mother, Mrs. H.M. Ferguson. They wounded Clint's wife. They wounded a Mrs. Hawkins, who was just a customer, and her daughter, who was like 14 years old, Mary Hawkins. So he was arrested, carried to the jail, $7,500 bond for each of the two murders because the second boy died the next day. So they filed 2 murder charges against him, $7,500 bond. I've read the name of the people who went on each of those at $2,500 apiece. It was just a huge amount for those days. The leading people of the town. They were friends of the Bryants. You know, nobody could believe, Jim could do something like this, and there must be some mistake. They hired apparently good lawyers. They hired two firms of lawyers, 5 lawyers, and later on he had to sign over his property, his 100 acres, to the law firm, to get the representation. Clint Ferguson was 41, and Ira Ferguson was 37 when this happened. Jim Bryant was 58. I believe that's right. And Ms. Ferguson, the mother, was 62. Clint's wife was 37, and then Ms. Hawkins was 34, and her daughter 14. And they were wounded and went to the hospital, some more seriously than the other. They all recovered. And so in July the 8th, 1935, the case was called for trial. And there had been lots of publicity. And so 2 days after it started, they had seated the jurors. 2 days after it started, the defense lawyers said that he couldn't get a fair trial in Tyler, Smith County, that too many people, knew this family. And so they moved it to Upshur County for the trial. And it was then May of 36 when the trial actually was started. He was in the jail somewhere. He was in for a while, and then he was out on bond for the rest of the time. Well, the case in Upshur County is recorded in stacks of paper, yay thick, which I've read, and so forth. That's some of the only details about Jim, that have been printed anywhere. The accounts in the newspaper were just pretty much factual. So I want to read you a couple of testimonies out of the material, and these are people, including Jim's mother, and I won't read what she said about him, but I'll tell you what she said. A couple of people who gave testimony trying to indicate the character of Jim Bryant that would cause him to do this. And one of the people was G.J. Jackson, who lived in Dallas then, at the time of of this testimony. And here's what he said. He approached Jim Bryant to rent from him a building located about 3 miles east from Tyler, immediately to and adjacent to the residence of the defendant. It could have been the old service station. Mr. Jackson wanted to put in a blacksmith shop. And Jim was very agreeable to renting it to him. And the guy looked across the street and decided he would go down there and maybe encourage them if they had, if he took this place, that if they had blacksmith needs, they'd refer people to him. Well, when he got over there and started talking to the Ferguson brothers, well, they asked him where he was going to open up this business. And he said, well, he pointed across the road. And they told him that you better leave Bryant alone. He won't be there much longer. That was the testimony at that point. There was another person, Paul Stallings. I've forgotten his reason for not being able to testify, but he heard the Fergusons personally talking about getting rid of Jim Bryant, and they'd failed in their effort to put him out of business by lowering the price of gasoline. And then he'd been holding out longer than they thought he'd hold out. And our Ferguson and his brother stated that more than one time during the conversation, the only thing to do was to kill him and get him out of the way, or have him killed and get him out of the way. Now, Jim Bryant's mother's testimony is heartbreaking because she relates incidences in his life that would indicate maybe he was having some mental worry, he did things differently than most people. Even later in life, he would walk down the road with his overalls rolled up, and you'd see, 2 inches of skin between the bottom of his overalls and his sock, which was pretty strange. I mean, people would judge that to be strange. But anyway, she talks about him as a child and how he was treated. One time he got really upset that they had sent a brother to medical school and they wouldn't send him. Of course, he was a married, man at the time. One time, I think it was the parents' 50th anniversary, they sent each of the children a Bible, and he sent his back without even opening the package to them, which hurt the parents considerably, as you can imagine. So anyway, there was a lot of testimony. And his brother, Dr. Bryant, testified that he thought Jim Bryant was mentally ill. And the jury apparently believed it, and he was acquitted on an insanity plea. He came back to Tyler. He bought some land out on the Jacksonville Highway, what we call now the old Jacksonville Highway. Before he gets to the loop, there was a curve in the road, and he lived out there and had a service station made out of rock. His house was right next to it. For many years. It was called Peaceful Valley, was kind of the name of it. That's where Jim Bryant ended his days. He died in 1974. His wife, Lula, lived on to 1994 and died at the age of 101. They're both buried at Rose Hill Cemetery, as are the Ferguson brothers, side by side. And one of the kind of touching things was the deed record where Mrs. Ferguson had to go and buy a lot in Rose Hill to bury her husband and her brother-in-law. One other picture, Felix Stringer's service station in its opening day of March the 24th, 1950. With all the signs and things you got free. I don't know what you got free, something, cold drinks or something, I think he said, and maybe some roses. This is an unusual tale because it indicates, more than a lot of others do, what life was like in the 30s, in this community, in this area of town. It was not unusual to pull out a pistol and settle things. Just from reading everything I've read, it sounds like to me that Mr. Bryant had just cause, that he had been pushed over the limit, as almost anyone can at one time or another. And you do things that you're sorry of later. I don't know if he was or not. I do know that the Ferguson children whose father was killed would not talk about it to their friends ever. And you know, I've heard that from people that have told me that they know the two daughters who live in Texas, and they see them occasionally. And it was just never discussed. It was one of those things you know, but you don't just talk about it. So tonight I talked about it. Thank you.